All right, we're rolling. Transform Your Workplace. I've got a couple people with me. I got Lacey Partipilo and I got Tyler Meuwissen with me. Lacey, one of your clients had forwarded something to you, and you'd forwarded it to Tyler and I thought it was fascinating. So there was, in the email string, there was a couple articles, and then there was a Google Doc.
Yes.
And I opened up that Google Doc. I was shocked. I don't know about what your reaction was, but I saw a bunch of wage data, basically crowdsourced from other people across the country.
I thought it was the client's wage
you at first
structures
thought it was.
that we were building, and then it got leaked out.
And it
or
was
something.
like in a Google
I'd never seen
spreadsheet.
anything.
Yeah, it was weird. So I started looking at it more, and I was like, okay, so there's wage information with all these variables, like that's what I wrote it down. It was sexual orientation, race, gender, salary, job title, years of experience, location, and there's like a bunch of other variables you could have added. But I thought it was interesting. So what went through my mind, I'm like, okay, people are using this probably as a negotiating tool,
right.
To make wages more transparent. Like, hey, I'm an engineer over here in the Silicon Valley and you're over in Boston. Are our wages comparable? Or even if like I'm another engineer in San Francisco area, am I getting paid what an engineer of my caliber is getting paid?
Right.
So there's a lot of things that went through my head. I'm like, okay, employees typically don't have the information that the employer does.
Correct.
So they're taking it into their own hands. It's not illegal, is it?
No, I mean, it's your own personal data that you're putting out there.
Right.
So not
and you
illegal.
can't stop employees from sharing wage information either.
Correct.
But I think kind of the foundation behind this data is perception of what their job duties are, their job function, which can create issues, especially with like a spreadsheet like this, where you have a bunch of titles listed, but we don't know what their position's doing exactly for the organization. So it could be different. A design manager in one company could be completely different than a design manager in another company.
Right.
One could manage people, one could not manage people, just processes. And that leads to a variance in pay, which can give the improper impression that this position commands a larger or lesser salary than it does.
Right. It's not just the title. It really is what is the day-to-day work of that person. And we're seeing a lot of inflated titles. So, trying to attract somebody to come into your organization. So maybe we list it as a director title, but it doesn't have any direct reports, and it's not actually managing a department. It's managing processes, like you said.
I'm glad I'm glad you brought up the fact that it's about the duties and not just the title, because I think a lot of employees, they would look at it like, and I do this sometimes too, not gonna lie, when I go on LinkedIn and I see like a post for a marketing director or VP of marketing role, and I'm like, $200,000 a year, baby. No, something stupid like that. I'm like, see?
People are doing that.
People are doing that. But it's looking at the title, not the role. So like I've looked at the actual duties. I'm like, those aren't even the same as what I do now. So like, how do you even compare them? And I think, there's a risk in a spreadsheet like this where employees are looking at it, where they just don't understand what goes into some of these actual wage surveys and job analysis. I think it's risky. Tyler, talk more about that.
Right. I mean, a lot of this data is not properly vetted. Even sources that use crowdsource information,
Glassdoor and LinkedIn,
PayScale and all that.
PayScale,
They have verifiable, certified compensation professionals going through this data, verifying that this is accurate, and kind of vetting it, against job duties, job functions. They respond. They talk to the HR departments, finance departments. A lot of this is getting filtered in, and it's going round and around, vetted constantly. With a spreadsheet like this, it kind of creates the risk that there's all this information is being put out into a spreadsheet with no proper checks and balances on if this is completely accurate or not. I mean, someone can even go on there and put lower salaries. An employer could even go on that spreadsheet and start putting down lower salaries for
them. No, I could go in and edit it right now.
Right.
Like,
Here's
overinflate mine or understate. Like an employer, an employer could go in there and say, well, I don't want to pay people this crazy wage.
And it's not taking into consideration revenue and always closely tied to industry and all the things that actually do make an impact on comp.
Sure.
So let's talk about the bigger issue in all this. Why is this even happening in the first place? I'll speculate and say that I think a lot of employees are thinking maybe the discrimination is happening. We've talked about gender pay gaps, but this even goes further with race, sexual orientation, years of experience, all those things as well. So I think they're trying to use this data to maybe call out the discrimination that may be happening. Also, as negotiating power, as I had mentioned earlier, I think employers have held onto the data and not been really forthright about it. So.
Right. Yeah.
There's a bigger issue. Employers just aren't sharing.
And I think there's a stigma that's been out in the industry for, decades, that talking about wages is bad. You should be talking about wages. It should be kept close and personal. But I think that nowadays, with pay transparency happening and occurring, I think there's the need for organizations to get in the forefront of how they're communicating compensation, to get ahead of stuff like this, and to also kind of project their compensation philosophy and compensation strategy to their employees and let them know that we do value, and this is the kind of compensation structure that we have in place, and this is what it looks like, and here's the projections that you can make through your position or either your department, and showing that progression through an organization naturally. And I think it's just now wages are becoming more commonplace now to talk about them. Just the economy is,
everybody's talking about it.
The economy is good, but a lot of the cost of living is higher, and people want more increased wages just to kind of combat that. So
I also think that with the low unemployment rate, that the power is in employees' hands versus the employers at times. And so to be able to go to a document like this and have data, and air quotes around the data, but data to go to your employer and say, hey, look, I'm maybe worth more than what you're paying me. And the employer's at a disadvantage because it's even more expensive to get the new talent in. We've talked about that on the podcast before. So it's like, maybe I'm going to do a little bit of an adjustment because it's going to cost me 2 times as much maybe to get a new person.
And I'm glad we're bringing up this subject. We're talking about a Google sheet that we ran across that was nationwide, right? What's to prevent employees doing this from within one company, though?
Right. Well, I thought that it was, when I first looked at it, I was like, oh my gosh, what's happening? Yeah. And it's with technology and Google Docs and everybody talking about pay, I don't think that there is anything, and the law allows employees to talk about it. So I think having a really well-documented philosophy is super important, and making sure that you're talking to employees about their compensation, they understand their total package. I think that would help. I think if this were to happen in one of my clients, I would probably have concerns about just the transparency between leadership and the employees. And there's probably other stuff happening that's creating a need to create something like that.
Right.
That's well said.
Culture problems, maybe.
Tyler, from your perspective, what's the kind of the call to action for employers to prevent something like this from ever really happening? Or even if it's happening in parallel, there's got to be things that employers can do to make sure that something like this doesn't backfire on them.
Right. Well, I think you definitely need to start looking at your comp structure first and foremost. I think you need to see where, if you have a structuralized, pay grades, ranges, you need to take a look at that. But also it comes down to this communication, make sure managers are properly communicating, compensation adjustments, or the transparency between, an employee and their progression throughout their career, make sure that's, the line of sight needs to be at the employee level. So they need to be able to see where where they can go within the organization, whether that be through compensation and benefits or throughout, their career path.
Anything else, guys?
No, I agree with what Tyler said, that communication is super important. So you can have all the best data and have the comp structures and the grades all documented with HR, but if managers don't know how to talk to employees about pay, it's almost pointless to do that work.
One other thing I wanted to mention was maybe just the the cadence of talking about it, because I think it's happening all the time now. Like I get alerts, I think it's weekly on like Glassdoor about like, oh, marketing director roles, here's what your market pay is in the Portland area. And then, and, you know, I see stuff on LinkedIn all the time. So it's just like, it's always on in front of me, on my mind or whatever. And I think employees are more likely to talk about it now. Whereas, you know, probably 10 plus years ago, it was like once a year we'd talk about it. You know, time to get raises or whatever. So,
Sure.
You know, from a communication standpoint, what should employers be doing?
Well, we're seeing now that, you know, communication through compensation should be obviously with their annual review, their performance review. After that, we can start talking about their compensation adjustments, but also doing like a pulse checks, you know, every half a year, 6 months, kind of see where that position's aligning with the market. Because right now, the market, especially for certain positions, is kind of volatile and it kind of rises and drops. And
you know, I see that in HR roles.
We are, and in tech. I mean, there are some where
especially.
it's by quarter even
Right.
that there's an adjustment that's significant.
Yeah, marketing, tech, engineers, all that are pretty vastly, pretty volatile. So, I mean, it's good to kind of, in addition to the annual review and the compensation discussions that time, to do it, you know, on a 6 month, take a look at the positions at least on a 6 month basis.
Yeah. Good stuff, guys. Thanks for coming on the podcast. I think it's an important topic, so I'm glad we were able to just kind of quickly turn this around and have you both on. So thanks, Lacey, Tyler.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See ya.